Welcome to the Once and Future Author Podcast. I'm Stephanie, and I'm so delighted today to be joined by author Grace Sammon. Grace is the author of The Eves, and you will definitely want to visit her at gracesammon.net, where you can sign up for all sorts of giveaways. I saw a 5-book giveaway right now for your book club, so you'll want to
Indeed.
right over there and check that out at gracesammon.net. But welcome, Grace. Thanks for joining me.
Oh, Stephanie, thank you for having me. It's an honor. You do such amazing work out here for authors and readers.
I'm so thrilled to be able to bring great writers to people who are just lapping it up. And thank you so much for being here. And what a book. What a book. Tell me a little bit to get us started. Give us a little overview of the book and how you got started writing.
So, The Eves is about the psychologically complex Jessica. She's almost 60, and she's really let go of her career, her ambition, her looks, which is a horrible thing that we say about women, by the way. But she's really let go of so much. She's living in a half renovated townhouse. She has never finished her doctoral dissertation, and she's really hiding from the world, and she's hiding behind a very big lie. And she has a very bossy friend named Sonia. And Sonia one day says to her, Jessica, this hiding from the world has to stop. And Sonia introduces her to this group of old women. They're from 70 to 94, and they're living in a collaborative community up top the beautiful Chesapeake Bay. And she says, you need to write the stories of these old women because they are making their mark on the world. And through the interviews that Jessica does, everybody's story changes. Jessica's life changes, and each of the older women's stories change as well.
Oh, what a fabulous premise. I love that. And it kind of reminds us all no hiding, live your authentic life.
And we're never done. And I think that's really the premise that I want people to come away with. The book was inspired by a couple of things which you asked about. Many years ago, I heard a John Prine song sung by Bette Midler, and it's Hello in There, Hello. And it talks about old people and how people pass them by as if they don't care, and they just stop and stare, and nobody bothers to stop and say, hello in there. Hello. And that was very haunting to me for decades. And then as I began to age myself, I thought, oh, what does this mean to be giving up my educational consulting firm, which I had had for almost 30 years? I traveled for 200 days a year. So, what did it really mean to give that up, to be the parent not of little children, to be a parent of adult children? And what was it like to no longer have those roles of either educational consultant, mom, daughter? So I really began to play with all of those things, and all of a sudden the eaves came.
Oh, I love that. And as a person myself whose kids are, about to fly the coop and all those other things, lots to learn.
There is a lot to learn, and I know that that was very hard when my kids really sprung the wings that I had trained them to have. And it's a very different role of parenting and being with your kids. So part of the story talks about it. The Eves is the story of the conversations we wish we would have with our parents if they were still here, and wish we could have with our children if they were ready to listen. Because I certainly know I was not ready to listen, and I'll leave that at that.
Could I pass it around to my kids so that they get the message?
I think so. I would say the audience for my book is people 45 and above, but I love it when I get younger readers who say, "Oh my gosh, this is great. It's a roadmap for where I'm going, or it's going to help me talk to my mom, or it's just a good story."
Right, right. Oh, I love that. And thank you for who should we buy this book for? Because that's always a big question for me. So this is a gift book. Who is this a gift for? I'm looking behind you, and besides a beautiful poster of your book, I see a beautiful quilt. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
I am so lucky. I have a wonderful group of beta readers, and I always encourage authors to have a beta group, to also have developmental editors if you like working more one-on-one. But when any of us give our book to the world, I always say it's the most naked thing I do. It's a very vulnerable place. And there's a scene in the book, and actually it happens at 3 different times, where people come to leave their mark on the land. And the way that plays out in the very beginning of the book is that there is a harvest scene, and these kids from inner city Washington, D.C. come down to this place where the older women live and other people live as well. And they harvest the land. And at the end of the night, they come into the barn and they dip their hand in paint. And then they leave their mark on the world. And that scene is repeated at several points in the book, but Jessica, the main character, can't do it. And that bossy friend I talked about a minute ago, she said, I saw you did not leave your hand in the paint. And this hiding stops. So getting back to my beta group, they were absolutely fabulous. And we'll go this way. When they read my book, they all dipped their hand in the paint and left their mark on the quilt. And then they wrote a quote from the book.
Oh, wow.
And when we sat down to do the real discussion of the final or close to final draft, which didn't turn out to be the close to final draft, they literally handed me the quilt. So of course I was in tears because of the symbolism, but then they wrapped me in it. And they said, and tonight we will discuss your book.
Oh my God.
Still gives me chills.
Oh yes, absolutely. And I'm loving this for process. I was just giving a workshop yesterday about getting beta readers and how important it is to the development of your book and how to involve them, in the process so that they are actual stakeholders in the success of the book. Now, you didn't even come to my workshop yesterday, but you heard every bit of it. And I'll have to bring you in as a guest next time because you're like becoming the poster child here.
I would love to, but I think that is, people frequently ask, what are some of the key things in being an author? And, I've written fiction and I've written nonfiction. So my first 3 books were solidly based research books and education. This is very, very different. And the beta group couldn't have been more important to me. There's a character that's talked about in chapter 1. He's talked about, I was done. My beta group kept saying, you never got back to him. And I was like, well, he's not important to the story. They were like, he is pivotal. And I didn't see that at all. I just did not see at all. And to the point where he's referenced in the beginning, but he's just like, he's referenced, period. He has no character. He has no name. He has no country of origin. And there I am thinking the book is done. And I went, oh my goodness, of course, I now see it. But they had to beat me up over it. They really did, because I kept pushing back. Oh, he's not important. He's not important. So that was a big beta group moment. So I'm so glad that you tell people that, because the story gets so much better.
Right. And you're obviously open to suggestion. And that's a huge thing with inviting beta readers along for the journey, is that you need to be willing to listen to them. It's one thing to invite them, but it's another thing to listen to them. I love your example of how it so improved the book, but I can hear the fight back. No, it's fine the way it is. I've told people to get an odd number of beta readers in case there's a discrepancy. Did you have any discrepancies with yours? Maybe 2 voting for one and 1 for another?
No, they had different opinions about things, and they all saw things differently. For example, there's 3 big plot twists in the book, like tear-jerky plot twists. And there's this big event that happens towards the end of the book. And I kind of wrap it up. And I think I'm done. And they were like, so how did Sonia react to that? And I was like, well, I really didn't think about that. And they were like, and did Roy have a reaction? So I had to rewrite that as well, because again, the story gets better. So I'm totally, I probably did go to your workshop. I agree with you on the odd number. The other thing, particularly for me, is to have a diverse group. In my book, I have Black people, white people, I have Native American people, I have a Latinx family, I have a lesbian couple, and I had to make sure that, especially as a Caucasian writer, and especially today, I made my best effort, first of all, to do my research, to be authentic, and to reflect the people I know and love, but also to make sure that I had other voices hearing the voices I was creating. And every time I say that, I also want to make sure that nobody thinks that they're a monolithic group. Just like I have these older women in the group, I would hate to say I gave this book to one old woman and they said, oh yeah, that's perfect. All old women speak that way. Or that, you know, I gave it to my 2 African-American girlfriends and say, is this okay? And just because they think it's okay or tweak it, whatever, I don't want them to feel that they also speak for all African-American women.
Right. No, that's awesome. Great understanding for us to have that. You know, you need to have representation. I always say it would be nice if your beta group has, you know, your target reader, but not to be so narrow about what that target reader may be. And if you're going to, especially like you described, you're speaking in the voices of these different people whose life experience is not your own.
Exactly. And I think your point is very well taken in that while my book is sometimes categorized as women's fiction, and that's where I most often place it, some of my strongest readers and some of my strongest beta readers were men. You know, they loved the male characters. They wanted more of the male characters, which let me give voice to them as well. So I'm getting more and more hesitant to, even though we have to type things in genres, I'm getting more and more hesitant to do that.
Oh, no, I agree with you. And it is rough that because that's the way people shop and that's the way we have to market so that people understand what is this book about, you
Yes.
know, and give them some sort of a clue. How about the title? Did you always have that title or did it come to you later on?
Oh, but we could just do a whole thing on beta readers.
Ah, the title came from the beta readers also.
Oh, and the cover.
Really? Oh
Yes.
my gosh. Oh yes,
Yes.
you definitely have to come along for my next beta reader workshop. This is
I,
awesome.
I would be happy to. So the original title of the book was Living Lessons. I love double entendre, and there's, you know, there's poignancy in the book, there's humor, there's tons of little double entendre things, which I just think I'm always think they're clever if someone else does them. So I try to do them as well. So the name of the book was called Living Lessons. And I thought that was wonderful because these older women were still living, they were still learning, and Jessica was learning from them. So they were living lessons. Doesn't that sound good?
And it's alliterative and everything.
It's alliterative, except everybody thought it sounded like a self-help book. They thought it sounded like a self-help book. They thought it sounded preachy, like we're going to teach you all of these living lessons. And then I was just stuck. I had been living with that title in my head for so long. But then I like the iterative process. Where the Eves came from is that these women do not believe they are at the end of their life. They are at the beginning. They are
Oh, okay.
starting something.
Very
So,
cool.
so then I got that. I thought was really a wonderful thing that they think they're at a beginning. That one of the women says to Jessica, as Jessica is taking their oral histories, do not do not write about our lives as if we are at the end of them, because once upon a time, we were still girls and we think we still are. And they very much believe and feel and are at the beginning of something quite wonderful. So that's where the title came from. And then the cover, I was absolutely sure, as I was of so many things, of what the cover should have been. There's this wonderful sculpture garden in Norway, in the Vigeland Sculpture Garden. And there are these wonderful, wonderful all old, saggy breasts, naked old people. And they just epitomize to me how beautiful, how absolutely beautiful old age can be, even if I may not be as comfortable in my old aging body. So the covers were these two amazing sculptures of these old naked women. And I thought they were powerful and strong and said everything I wanted to say. And the beta group thought they looked like something out of Nazi Germany. So then you have to conceive a cover. And that's the whole thing about, I think, what people don't understand so much about the publishing process. It is not just the writing, as you so know. It is what cover is going to be. How's it going to, what is your subtitle going to be? And the author is so involved in it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you came to this cover over a process, and these women, how many are in this beta group of yours?
Well, they're different ones. My original reading beta group, which gave me this fabulous quilt, is 7.
Okay.
And then I sent it out to some other authors and said, can you serve as my beta group?
Right. So
Yeah.
we had more.
So there may have been five there.
I love that you had them involved in the title and in the cover and development of characters, but that says so much for you, because it says how open you are. When I was discussing beta readers with a group yesterday, I said that the fact is we can't be our own beta readers. Either you're in love with everything you write, or many writers go through that phase of you hate everything that you write.
Absolutely.
But whether you're loving it or hating it, you are the most non-objective person on the face of the planet about that book.
Every word in my first draft was perfect. Every word. But I think that there's lots of other ways that authors also get at the right tone and the right words, quite honestly. I have a really wonderful gift in that my husband's super supportive. And if I get good pages, I'll give them to him, he'll read them, and then he'll read them out loud to me. And hearing my words in somebody else's voice is always helpful to me. The other thing it does is catch me on things that I wouldn't catch otherwise, even if I was proofreading. The youngest character is 15. Well, I can tell you that at one page she was 13, then she was 15, then I think she was 16 a page later. And it was just because I was being sloppy, but I wasn't slowing down the creative process enough to catch that. But I could if I sat and listened to the words.
Absolutely. And hearing especially dialogue being spoken back tells you whether or not it is authentic and natural for that character in a way
Absolutely.
that reading it on the page does not.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm delighted you have a supportive spouse. Does he also catch, errant commas and semicolons, or is he?
Oh my gosh, he is the king of commas. I have to take them out. There's a million commas. And I think the comma is kind of going away. And I personally like commas, but he will have.
He does.
Not as much as my husband loves commas.
Some people just, and I was advising people about using Grammarly, for example, on their computers. Grammarly is majorly in love with the comma.
Yes.
If there's a spot that there's a slight pause, boom, 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 boom. 172 errors. No, there's not. It's 172 places you think you could put a comma.
I know. It's amazing.
It is.
We haven't even talked about semicolons.
Oh, well, in my workshop yesterday, my comment about semicolons is, if you're thinking about putting in a semicolon, don't do it. Because as a person who reads, dozens of manuscripts every single week, I'd say 90% of the semicolons I see are misused. So unless you're really sure, don't do it.
Well, I think they're misused. And at least for me, because I've written both fiction and nonfiction, I don't think a semicolon has any place in a fiction. I personally, I just can't, make it 2 sentences.
Yeah, well, that's what I said is, quite frankly, a semicolon can always be replaced by either a period, a comma, or the word and. Yes. So if you actually chose to use a semicolon, either you better have a darn good reason that it really improves the sentence, or I think you're just being pretentious.
I love that. I love that.
But you're right. Nonfiction is different. That is definitely a place for it. But if I see it littered in somebody's fantasy work, I think you're just trying too hard at this point.
I love that.
So tell me about the whole process from soup to nuts. What surprised you the most when you started this journey and you thought, this is what it's going to be like? I'm going to write this book. I've written some nonfiction. What shocked you about all of this?
I think the two things that shocked me the most were the first, how much work it takes after publication. It's not surprising that, I haven't showed up on every single morning talk show, for example. The amount of work it takes, even if you hire a publicist and a good publicist, you still have to be involved in the work in huge ways. The amount of time, I remember talking to someone several years ago when I was in the process, and they were talking about how you have to expect to spend at least 2 hours a day on social media. And I thought, that's ridiculous. Well, I probably spend at least 4 now. I'm not sure it's always productive time.
Right.
But this comes from a woman who a year ago thought Facebook and Instagram were largely useless venues. And now I live there. So that amount of work post publishing is shocking to me. The other thing is the real community that those platforms have engendered, if you will. I used to, quite humbly now, say that nobody really has Facebook friends. You have people you follow, no, I have developed incredible friendships as part of this. You and I have never met, but personally, but you've had me as a guest. We clearly have a lovely opportunity and a vibe together. And you're going to reach out, and I'm happy to be a guest and help you out. And I just think this community is amazing to me. And I really encourage people to get involved prior to publication, which was something I was told and did not do. But find the places on social media where you're really at home.
Mm.
That's a really important thing to me, to find those other supportive groups. There's so many groups that will lift you up.
There are, and there are so many writer groups. And like you said, you can tell within 3 posts if these are your people
Yes.
or not. And there are so many of them that you can absolutely find your tribe out there on social media if you're using it for writers groups. But what you said about promotion, and especially you are now a fiction writer coming from a nonfiction background, it's very different when you're doing nonfiction. Depending on what your books were being used for, it might have been that all the work was beforehand in the writing, in the researching, the citations, etc. But depending what your book was being used for, there was an instant distribution going on for that book the moment it was done. I'm speaking about educational books and text
Absolutely.
books and business books. And once it's done, I'm not saying there's no marketing, but very often that book is a useful tool for something. Whereas with fiction, people who are still in the writing phase thinking, oh, I can't wait till it's done. This is so much work. Oh, you didn't even start the work, babe.
Well, you're very right about that. When I wrote my 3 educational books, they were tickets to other things. I wrote a book. Now, all of a sudden, I'm a keynote speaker. There's so many doors that got opened. More people wanted me to write more books immediately. Magazine editors wanted me to submit more articles. So really the books were a ticket to more things. And in some ways the novel is that. But I think that's a very good way of putting it, Stephanie, that the work really comes afterwards. Certainly there's tons of work in creating the book. And, every author I talk to loves doing research as well. Even if they're one of those people who writes by the seat of their pants, they still like to go off and go down a rabbit hole in research. But yeah, the amount of work afterwards is stunning. And keeping it fresh. My book's a year old now, and I've been really blessed to be on close to 50 interviews and blogs, etc. But even I sometimes I wake up in the morning and go, what am I going to post about today?
Right. Right. Or what are you going to talk about? Gosh, I hope that Stephanie has something new to ask me. I've done 50 interviews already.
I knew you would. I knew you would.
But it's not easy. It is definitely not easy to, put on your fresh face day after day after day and be just as enthusiastic about that book for new listeners and potential buyers every single day.
It isn't, but that's where reviews come in. And I think this is a true statement, at least the authors that I have become tribe with, if you will. Most of us are pretty humble and we don't like pushing our book. We know that's part of what we have to do, and we have to be enthusiastic about that. And we quite honestly have to ask people to like our pages and give us reviews. But when you get a review that just is so wonderful and on target, that means everything. And that's what keeps it fresh, that there are still new readers out there who are going to be listening to it. I actually got a review the other day and I was really happy for the honesty. It says the book starts out slowly, but after page 30, I could not put it down. And I have to say that's honest. I had reworked that first chapter time and time and time and time again. And no matter what I did, I couldn't make it that, last night I went to Mandalay, that first sentence. Yeah. And I think for this book, that exposition, that heavy load, if you will, exposition is critical to all of the other things that happen. So I don't think it's a mistake, but I do think it's a fair comment. And then, anytime someone says, I couldn't put your book down, or I don't want it to end, or is there a sequel? Those are the things that are inspiring and keep you fresh.
Right. Well, which brings me to the question, is there a sequel?
Oh, there so needs to be. There so needs to be. I don't see it. Now, it's interesting because as probably almost every author you talk to says, I really do see this as a movie or a Netflix series or an HBO series. I love it when reviewers tell me that because it says that it's not all about ego. But I can see myself helping write the the follow-on episodes if it ever turned into a multi-year sequence, but I don't yet see that in a book. My friend Mary Sheriff, she's writing her second novel right now, and she has a very interesting approach. She is writing the novel as a screenplay and is then going back and filling it in for the other novel-y kind of things. So maybe I need to do that. So there are more books in my head, but there is not another sequel yet.
Okay, well, we do have to wait until it materializes, but that leads me to, when you were writing this, are you what a plotter or a pantser? Although I like some other words better. I had an author who got me into calling the pantsers discovery authors, that they're always just discovering rather than just flying by the seat of their pants. So how about you?
Yes, it's a funny term, isn't it? And I didn't know that term a year ago. And I remember the first time somebody asked me, I thought they said, was I a panther? And I didn't. Embarrassing author moment. But I think I'm both. In the field of education, we always talk about starting with the end in mind. Mm-hmm. So if you want your kids to be able to speak fluent Spanish at the end of Spanish 4, you need to figure out what Spanish 3 should be and Spanish 2 should be and what Spanish 1 should be. And in Spanish 1, you need to figure out where do you start the kids so that they end at a certain place. So in my book, I knew where it ended. Obviously, I didn't know all of it because my beta readers helped me tweak that. But I knew where it started. I had that essential question. What do you do if you are at a turning point in your life and you are lost? And I knew where I wanted this to go for Jessica. It was the middle that was the unknown part to me. Okay. And so I had highlights, but no, I didn't always. I have a rough outline in my head.
Gotcha. Now, when you're working in that no man's land, mm-hmm. shall we say, I'm kind of envisioning you're sitting at your computer and you can do the beginning and maybe you can do the end, but now you have to delve into, say, chapter 2 or 3 and you don't have a plan.
Well, it's funny because I actually did write the first 2 chapters and then the last chapter.
I had a feeling.
And then
the readers mixed it all up, but that's it.
Right, they did. Well, actually, what is chapter now one now was chapter 3, and then you know how that goes.
I know how that goes.
So yeah, and yeah, you're like you said, you have to be open to it. But then I think you get into a rhythm, and one thing does flow upon the next. And we know that in a chapter, you should have something that picks up from before, and there should be some sort of challenge. And then there's an up and down. And at the end of the chapter, there's got to be that other challenge so that you have that page turning, right? So I think that I always tried to do that, even if that chapter didn't always wind up that way in a final product.
Mhm.
I left myself with the question of what would happen next.
Awesome. That such great food for thought for others who are saying, I don't know how to write what I don't, where it's going. It's going to come. It's going to come. But what do you do if you could be any place in the world to get those creative juices flowing? We can just pick you up, Grace, and put you in a writer's retreat right now. Where is that?
Oh, it would be actually on a plot of land overlooking the Chesapeake Bay, which is where my book takes place. And it would be out just overlooking the bay, or
Ah,
probably any body of water.
okay. So you're a water girl and you like to be on site. Is there some place that you'd like to write a book, not a sequel, it maybe something totally different? Is there something yet to explore?
In terms of a topic,
Topic, location. If we're not talking about a sequel, is there something else?
yes, I think that my next book that may happen takes place in Cleveland, Ohio. And although I've visited it, I don't know it well. So I need to go spend some time in Cleveland. And then the other thing is, one of my educational books is called Battling the Hamster Wheel. And it's strategies around high school improvement and how frequently we get stuck in a rut of just keep on doing the same old, same old. And there's been some interest in me creating a series of other Battling the Hamster Wheel books. And I'm toying with that.
Oh,
So
okay.
mhm.
Now, why Cleveland, Ohio?
I think for me, my brother lives there, but really that's where my grandmother emigrated to when she came from Germany. And she came at a very young age with her sister. I think she was 16. And I just can't imagine what that would have been like to get on a steamer in steerage
Mm,
and come across with $16 in your pocket and get to New York and then suddenly go to Cleveland, Ohio. And she lived in a small apartment, and then she lived behind, when she married my grandfather, they lived behind a plumbing store. So I want to explore that. And I visited Cleveland before the pandemic, and it is an amazing city of firsts.
I had
So
no idea.
oh, it's the first city in the country that had organized mail delivery. It's the first city that had traffic lights. It used to be the car capital of the world.
Hmm,
So there's all these little historical pieces that I think would be fascinating to weave into that immigration story.
love that. Okay, who's going to play your characters in the movie?
Oh, I was going to have up on my website, and I do have different things on the website. One of the things I wish I had on my website, and I should just take the time to do it, is for book clubs that would say, who would you cast as the characters? The oldest male character's name is Tobias Thatcher, and he's 90 plus. He's African American. He's a medical doctor, and it's his land that all the characters live on. And as I wrote him, I just kept hearing Morgan Freeman in my head over and over and over again. And that would be my dream. And I can tell you, he did hold my book. Now, he may have held my book and put it down immediately, but I know he has touched my book. So that would be my dream. But there are so many, there are certainly very, very skilled other African American actors who could play him. But he was the voice I heard anyway. And then I think, the character of Jessica, there are so many women of that late 50s into their 60s characters. Gina Davis, for example, she would make a very good Jessica, But she just did an article several weeks ago that talked about how there were not enough roles for women of a certain age. So I would be so happy and honored with any of the skilled actresses to take on that role of Jessica. And I love that I've got, 70, 80, and 90-year-old women too. And I would just love for this to come to life, not only certainly for myself, but for the gift of us seeing such skilled actresses on the stage at so many ages.
Love that. Love that. Now,
Thank
as
you.
a reader, because I presume you like to read as well,
Yes.
who is your favorite author to read?
Oh, I might have had a favorite author before I got into this author community. I have some long-standing ones. Daphne du Maurier, just an all-time favorite. Anna Sewell, who wrote Black Beauty, the first book I ever really fell in love with, all on my own. But I don't know that I have a favorite author right now. Uh, I love the book Women of Troublesome Creek by Kim Michelle, and I'm going to forget her last name. That's a fabulous, fabulous book because I like to learn as well. And that's a perfect book, the book Women of Troublesome Creek, because not only does it talk about women in Appalachia who deliver books literally with a donkey. Just a whole mobile library on hooves, if you will. But it's about people who were physically blue. They had a genetic, uh, I don't want to say disorder because that's not right. They had a genetic arrangement
Right.
that made their skin blue. And this is something I knew nothing about. So I love learning, and I love learning when it's not shoved at me. It's interwoven in the book. And I tried to do that a lot in my book. There's a character who has brain cancer. And I went out and did a little bit of research on it. And one of the treatments for brain cancer is to inject the polio virus into the person who's suffering from brain cancer. And it works. Not in all cases, obviously. But I loved throwing in those little factoids.
Yeah, that's something I never knew. And I'm with you. I love learning about things without it being shoved at me. If I wanted to read nonfiction, I would.
Right.
There's something to be said for not doing that. Well, if we can't name a favorite book now, how about as a child? What was that first book that got you saying, I want to be a writer?
I think it might have been Black Beauty. And Anna Sewell has a great story about that. So first of all, I don't know how old I was, maybe 9 or 10, maybe. And my brother Bob gave me this book on Christmas. And I remember not going to Christmas dinner. How my mother ever let me do that. We're a big Italian family. And I just remember curled up on the couch, not being able to put that book down. And I think, I'm going to say I'm not going to remember the date. I'm embarrassed now. But she was only alive. She died within a year of it coming out. But she knew it was popular, and now it's always listed as one of the top 10 children's books of all time. So that's probably the first book I fell in love with. And then I would say Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier is the first time I fell in love with reading a book with someone. My mom said, "Did you want to read this book with me?" And the two of us got separate copies out of the library, and I just couldn't wait to talk to her about it.
Oh, how wonderful. What a great mother-daughter activity.
Oh, it was wonderful. And then we read all the other Daphne du Maurier books too. So
And hopefully after today, we can get some mothers and daughters perhaps reading The Eves together.
it would be wonderful. Thank you.
That would be absolutely wonderful. Maybe I'll have to send a copy to my mother and my daughter of this.
Oh,
And
nice.
started. Finally, some words of advice or tips, wisdom, people who are starting out this journey as a writer themselves.
It's funny. I'm often asked to give advice, and I think I've said several things today already about like getting a Facebook group, etc. But I think that for me, I'm always hesitant to give it, by the way. But I think for me, it's know why you're writing.
Mm.
And that was something my publisher said to me early on. And I kept on saying, well, I just have a story. I want to write it. And he kept pushing back. Why do you want to write it? Why do you want to write it? I think that probably most of the authors you talk to will say you're not going to get rich on your novel. Probably unless it gets turned into that movie or Netflix or whatever. So I think you have to know why you're writing. And part of that is what will success mean to you. is success getting it out the door and then having to be able to physically hold your book in the hand, then that's great. Is it to have an Instagram presence or a podcast presence? Is it to have that ticket to something else? I think knowing why you're writing, and that may change, but I think initially you have to know what is your goal in doing this.
Oh, fabulous. You're so right. I'm a big one for if you know your why, it can get you through the dark days.
Yes.
And that's so much more valuable as a tip, shall we say, than, all the tools that go into it, is just really doing a little self-reflection before you start. Would you change a thing about your journey?
Oh, I probably wish I knew more about social media
Before you
ahead of, but there's been so much good that's come out of it. And I'm a big one on not looking back and having regrets. Certainly there could have been different paths I could have taken, but no, I think if we could live a regret-free life, that would be a really great goal.
I agree with you. Well, I've been delighted to have you on, and we'll be following your star. Grace is available for book clubs and all sorts of things. She would love to have you. As I mentioned, gracesammon.net is where you can find her and find signing up and different giveaways and things like that. And please do. You definitely want to watch this rising star. Thank you so much for joining me.
Stephanie, it was an incredible pleasure. And again, thanks for all you do out here for readers and writers.
My pleasure.